my location in Washington State in the United States. I acknowledge the Coast Salish indigenous people on whose ancestral lands I currently reside and pay respect to the elders past and present. I acknowledge the tribes and bands of the Medicine Creek Treaty, including the Squaxin Island, Nisqually, Puyallup tribes, who are the traditional and continuing custodians of this land. I personally commit to actively supporting efforts towards reparations and the return of these lands to their care. We're excited and grateful for the opportunity to host this extraordinary group of practitioner activists for what we know will be a provocative and interesting dialogue. Through this dialogue, our speakers will engage with each other and with us in the exploration of their work and visionary activism. We are honored to have each of our practitioner activists with us here today. Joining us are Kim Browne in Melbourne, Australia, Janeth Malela in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, Ashley May in Los Angeles, US, and Valerie Polakow in Ann Arbor, United States. You will get to know each of our speakers through their dialogue, but we are privileged to have as our host and interviewer, Dr. Valerie Polakow. She will act as moderator and provocateur through the discussion. She's a transformative public educator, scholar, activist, author, focusing on poverty, inequality, and social policy. She's the author of 7 books, including her first book, The Erosion of Childhood, a book that personally changed my life. Her passionate work with and on behalf of children and their families is well described in her following powerful quote: "My public advocacy and scholarship on behalf of children has been dedicated to bearing witness, as Hannah Arendt terms it, to understanding and making visible the experiences of those whose lives have been made invisible by oppression and dispossession, and whose voices have been silenced and rights violated." Before we begin, I want to thank all of our speakers for their valuable time, the RISI Steering Committee for supporting this initiative, the University of North Texas for their extraordinary, heroic technical support, and all of our audience members for being here today. Finally, I want to remind you to all visit the RISI website and learn more about RISI and the upcoming conference in Manchester, UK. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Valerie.
Thank you, Chelsea. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to our panelists and audience members across the globe and in all time zones. Welcome to all of you. I'm very excited to moderate our global activism panel with 3 incredible women activists and child advocates. Before we begin, I would like to say a few words about the organization of our panel today. I'll be moderating the first hour of the 90-minute session, and I will function variously as interviewer, provocateur, commentator, and also discussion threader as I try and weave together the issues that are discussed in an informal and interactive format. After the panel is done, we will take about an hour. There'll be a very brief pause so that those audience members who need to leave the session can do so, and those who wish to participate in the Q&A that follows, which will be approximately 30 minutes, will then be moved to a panelist status, and it will become a very interactive format. So, with those few words, I would now like to turn to Kim, Janeth, and Ashley, and welcome you once again, and begin by asking each of you if you could introduce yourselves by way of some highlights of your own life histories, and in particular, if you could speak about the turning points in your own life histories that impacted you and led you to choose the pathway of activism that you have done. So, shall we begin with you, Kim?
Oh, hello, and thank you very much, Val, and also to Chelsea and the RISI whole committee and everyone here for welcoming me today. I too, before answering that terrific question, would just like to acknowledge that I'm on Wadawurrung country here in Victoria, Australia, and I too would like to acknowledge the elders, past and present, on this beautiful country, and particularly on a very hard day here in Australia, which is marked as Australia Day, which is a really colonising day for many Indigenous people here in Australia. So I'm particularly pleased to speak to activism today as part of this panel. And as part of that acknowledgement, that is exactly what activism looks like for many Indigenous people right from the beginning, as soon as we start to speak. And I particularly acknowledge that because for me, coming to understand my identity as an Indigenous person here in Australia very much started in my teenage years. It was a clear turning point for me. It had been expressed to me through my grandmother, where there was a lot of shame in my family around our Indigenous ancestry. And that is quite a common experience for many Indigenous people here in the nation of Australia. And that's, you know, as part of a colonised history, and one where we are part of stolen generations, where many children have been removed forcibly removed from families and continue to be here in Australia. That these are very, very difficult experiences and very, very harmful even into the present day, where there's a lot of shame for families in terms of how you identify, and particularly if you have a mixed descendancy between maybe indigeneity and also a white family or non-Indigenous heritage as well. And so I felt like I kind of treaded in two kind of experiences, a white Australia, if you like, and also an Indigenous Australia growing up, and particularly at a time where, as I mentioned, shame was part of it, but in our education system as well, being Indigenous was not recognised, widely speaking, and it was not valued as well. So it was easier to remain silent, and it was easier to remain hidden, and it was safer, culturally safer to do so as well. But in that process, you don't know who you are. You don't know your cultural history. You don't know your language. You don't know where you fit, and that is a huge loss. Where I see that today in terms of having my own children is that I've needed to work really hard to understand much more about my culture in order to share that. And so some of these experiences have really led to me to work in really active ways as a lecturer at Deakin University in our Indigenous unit, teaching Indigenous knowledges and sharing in that culture, including the shame and the tensions and the challenges with other students, pre-service students often going into education as well, who will be able to take a journey forward in their own learnings and understandings to try and reshape the ways that people understand Indigenous knowledges in the Australian context, and can continue to do so going forward. And I particularly, as I mentioned, today is a day known as Australia Day here in Australia, the 26th of January. It marks British arrival here in Australia. So it's a very challenging day for many Indigenous people, but it's a fraught day as well for many people, as they're uncertain about marking a day as one of celebration where there is actually a lot of continual trauma for many people. So it's a very contested space today. And so I'm marking it not just by being here, but in what I'm wearing as well, in the background that you would see where there's some Indigenous art on mugs. These are all ways to represent who I am and to celebrate the survival of continued Indigenous knowledges in this country.
Thank you, Kim. Janeth, shall we move to you?
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Janeth Malela from Tanzania. I'm working with the Anjita Child Development Foundation. Before explaining more information about my turning point, I would like to appreciate the race organizers, churches, the moderator, and the organizers from the race for the nice event which will provide the ideas in terms of how the activists will support in terms of promoting early childhood education at the global level. In addition to that, I acknowledge also the Anjita management team in terms of providing the regular support for me in terms of promoting the early childhood education at the national level. And this also providing also the opportunity for sharing the cultural practices in terms of early childhood development at the global level. Coming to the point, the ideas or how the inspiration which I have in terms of the early childhood education in relation to the activism is pending to the when we look about how I came from personally as a Janeth, I came and I was taken care of at the village level. And during the lifetime when I was living at the village, we are interacting with the various difference of the children's. And I believe that, the life of the village in terms of how the people, they can take care also the way as the extended family which we are living, and also how the community, like a socialism, whereby every child within the community or within the family is responsible for any person who are nearby the community. From there, when I was proceeding in terms of upgrading, in terms of taking my education, I was practicing in terms of at the secondary level and also at the college level, whereby we are practicing in terms of the field area in terms of attachments. So during the field working, I was observing also for the children, how the children from the village or from the rural, where we are practicing about our field learning, how the children was, and also how the children was very playful in terms of their daily early learning activities which we are doing there. And in connection to that, when I was coming back at the experience in terms of practicing the ECD at the work level, in terms of working experience, I was working directly to the community. And in the community, there was various of the community programs whereby there was a cultural practices whereby the community and the parents from that society, they are using so as to take care for the children. For instance, how you can take care for the children in terms of play, how you can take care of the children in terms of caring for the children, also the way how they, during the eating style for the children, they are eating as the one or the group. So this was among of the cultural practices which they were practicing and were being used at the community level, where it has direct relationship with promoting early childhood development. From that one, we, as the activist, I came up with an idea of how using the community-based approach, whereby we are using the community initiative based on the cultural practices and the cultural beliefs in the specific area, so as they can come up with their idea in terms of promoting the early childhood education. So for that one, even for the international level, it has been added an advantage because it's one of the area where the community they are using and also the nation we are using. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Now, Ashley, let's hear from you.
Good morning. I'm Ashley. I'm here from Los Angeles, California. Let's see, my life history and my turning points. I was raised in Inglewood, California, which I will name as the ancestral and unceded territories of the Tongva people, in multi-generational homes and on the same property as my great-grandparents and my grandparents. I was supported, and my mother was supported through precarity, through divorce, by a type of loving care that meant we never had to depend on the state, but that we depended on each other. When I wasn't in the care of my grandparents, I was in the care of a network of other mothers and aunties who have modeled the type of system that I see us building as a community together on our own. My turning point, I came into the work of early childhood policy and research with all this on my heart, and I witnessed the challenges faced when organizations prioritized professionalization instead of traditional knowledges and practices, programming that failed to consider the needs and the voices of those on the ground, and a nonprofit industrial complex that basically could not imagine a world that didn't need it. And I continue to choose to imagine otherwise. Through my work right now, I am really bearing witness to the Black children and the caretakers in my local community, Los Angeles, Inglewood, and South Central Los Angeles. I am centering the traditional ways that we have cared for each other. I am always trying to remind us of what we've always already been doing. And I'm very much right now focused on exploring the folk beliefs and practices and values that nourish a Black childhood imaginary. And I get at that by several programs that I can talk about later, but most importantly, wilderness forest gatherings with Black children and their caretakers as a site of resistance, fugitivity, and dreaming. Thank you.
Thank you. I always find it so fascinating to listen to life stories that have shaped the on-the-ground praxis that people adopt, and listening to each of you share just highlights from your life histories. It's so interesting to see how portions of your life histories have led you into the specific focus and engagement that you've taken on in your respective communities. And, you know, listening to you, Kim, a teacher of young children and also a teacher in higher education, and trying to create a pedagogy that's just and that's founded on Indigenous knowledge in terms of what you missed and the shame that encompassed so many of those in your community is also so interesting to think about in terms of the work that you're doing now. And one of the questions that I want to ask all of you is about the tensions and the challenges that you've faced navigating these different worlds that you have your feet and your hands in, I guess. I mean, listening to you, Janeth, and your experience of being a child who felt taken care of and also responsible for others in her community as you were growing up, and your focus then on the importance of cultural practices within a community as the base from which to launch any initiatives seems to have led you into both the nonprofit sector and the government sector. And again, it will be very interesting to hear from you about the tensions and the challenges that you face navigating those different milieus. And similarly, Ashley, as a child ethnographer, looking at the worlds of Black children and dispossession and the ways in which kinship plays such an important role, you've spoken to that in your own life history in terms of your various aunties taking care of you, your extended family stepping in, and that you felt buttressed by a network of caregivers. And then looking at the work that you've done in terms of child ethnography, kinship, of course, and non-formal systems seem to play such an important role. So I'd like each of you to think about the challenges and the tensions that you faced in your current practice and the power structures that you've had to confront and how you've navigated your way through those tensions and challenges. Sometimes it's useful to think of a specific example around which you can weave your narrative about how you negotiated your way through that. So I'll give you a second or two to think about that and then ask who would like to begin. And I'm sure you have many narratives that you could share, but perhaps one of them that would illustrate and be exemplaric of what you had to face as a community activist as you negotiated your way through different power hierarchies, perhaps different communities, different sectors. Who would like to begin? Kim, over to you.
Oh, thanks,
Yeah.
Val. What a really great provocation there, and important questions for us all to deeply consider. My work intersects in sort of three ways. So it very much intersects between spaces around indigeneity, early childhood education, and also critical disability approaches. And I mention all of those areas, particularly I've already spoken to some extent there a little bit about in my Indigenous heritage, but I'm also a legally blind person. So I struggle in particular with peripheral vision. I kind of have tunnel vision, which is a little bit ironic, I think, in early childhood education. And I have a long history as an early childhood professional in early childhood education. So I came to the early childhood profession as a fully sighted person and worked as a teacher and have for over 25 years. And in that time, my vision really deteriorated. And it deteriorated to a point where I started to question my own abilities around teaching children, because I considered notions around if I, could I keep children safe? Could I supervise children? Where I, was I enabling risk and potential harm to children? And these were questions that came up in my practice, and I think that they're questions that can come up for many people in lots of different ways as part of early childhood practices. But they're really they're a strong representation of a deficit model and they very much speak to the individual person, and that, you know, these challenges become personal and potentially harmful. And I think they also speak to the power structures that are around us, where we're not actually thinking about early childhood education as a diverse sector, where there's room for everybody, because the early childhood education contexts are not just about children, they involve adults. You know, we have an adult workforce, and we have many adults that are part of our early childhood context. And we also have many, many spaces in early childhood education globally where we think about inclusion. But we often think about inclusion around children, and we don't actually often think about inclusion around adults. So these became really enormous challenges and tensions for me as part of my practice. And it was my Indigenous heritage that led me to think differently, because in Indigenous culture, we don't have a word for disability. Across hundreds of nations in Australia, Indigenous nations, there's not a word for disability. If you are part of community, if you are a person of Indigenous heritage, you're an active part of community. You may still need a chair or someone to help you. As a person who experiences disability, it's not negated as part of conversation or as part of activity. It's part of who you are, and it is enabled so that you can continue to be part of community. And these were particular points for me where I thought, hang on a second, I'm implicit and complicit as part of keeping myself in that deficit paradigm. And when I start to think about it from an Indigenous perspective, actually I'm, an enabled community member. And so I push back to that. And I push back to those power structures. And that's been part of my PhD research, to go back into a teaching community in an early childhood context, which was right up till the middle of last year, and work as an early childhood teacher, as a person who experiences disability. And I found I could, and work strongly and with high quality pedagogical practices as an early childhood practitioner.
Do any of the panelists want to comment on anything Kim has described? And jump in. Questions or comments for her?
I just want to step in and carry on this conversation about, you mentioned Kim's safety. That's one of the tensions that I'm currently thinking about, and thinking about a childhood safety, because as you know, my interests are in formal networks of care, which are in many ways illegal in Los Angeles, California. And the claim that organizations and state licensing make is that in order to be a safe place for a child, and as an extension in my work, a Black child, you must be licensed and you must follow particular guidelines, or else you can be fined and even jailed, right, or persecuted. And so I'm thinking about, I don't have any answers, but I'm curious about how children can be kept safe, and how the traditional ways of caring for each other within the Black and the Brown communities in Los Angeles can be seen in better light, and thinking about how Black children inhabit this place and their home place with the many histories and the racial violence. How do we both protect our children and ourselves from the state? I'm always thinking about that. It's very sexy to be, you know, approached by a community-based organization that's going to give you funds to get, you know, better quality materials, to lead your way to becoming a family childcare home, or pursuing licensure, getting, you know, CPR certification, etc. But we're still often criminalizing precarity, right? And so what are you doing to change the conditions on the ground? That's what I'm thinking about. It's always about how you're breaking the law because maybe you have 5 children in your care that are from different families, and you know, you're not able to feed them the right food, or have enough rooms, or have enough space, or your neighborhood is not safe. But what are we doing to change that, so that this doesn't become an issue anymore? Those are the questions I'm asking right now, because I feel like a lot of the programs that exist in communities and in nonprofits, at least locally here and throughout California, which I know a great deal about, are just putting Band-Aids on the situation. And that, I think, is a part of the not willing to never be needed anymore, right? Because you fear, as an organization, as a nonprofit, that if the conditions were to shift on the ground, right, that continue to basically orient us toward Black death, right, quite seriously here, then you wouldn't be needed anymore, right? And so what are you willing to do to not be needed anymore? And what are you willing to do not to uphold this narrative of like Black and brown homes, home places, and neighborhoods not being safe, right? Just for the sake of you getting your funds. And like, it really boils down to that. And so I've been thinking a lot about that. So thank you, Kim, for bringing that conversation of safety.
So how do you fight that, Ashley? I mean, in terms of trying to create informal networks of care, and some of it most likely kinship care networks. How do you function in a system that, and I'm getting to Janeth in a sec, how do you function in a system that is punitive if you don't have licensure, if you don't follow the safety regulations?
Well, I mean, the quick answer is really that they're already doing it, right? So many organizations throughout California will tell you that often the family, friend, and neighbor caregivers refuse, like they engage in these refusals of like not really being available, not really coming to the webinars and the training systems, are being very, very cautious around these you know, efforts and pushes towards professionalization. It's already happening. I was a product of it. I see it still happening now. And in my field work, and I mentioned in some recent writing with the Syrian families, it exists. The informal networks are already here. The refusal to engage with the state is happening, right? Mm-hmm. But in the meantime, how do we get the state off of our backs? Like, that's what I'm thinking about. It's the whole structure, the whole foundation just needs a complete overhaul, and it just needs to go, right? You know, and I hear my sister's voice in my head, who's like a DA and who deals with issues of violence against children, and we're always bumping heads. But I think it's an important conversation that also her side of the coin does not really ever work out at all, you know? And so there's no easy answers, but I can tell you that it's already happening, that people are already on the ground imagining, you know, reimagining possibility of caring for each other. Much of my work is very much centers on, you know, mutual and direct aid. We're doing it, right? Childcare began as an effort of mutual aid, right? Even the California Resource and Referral Network was like a play group, right? You know, so there's already people are coming together, and I think we've got to back out of the systems that we're putting in place, and these, you know, even like childcare in California ending up now under, what is it, CDSS now? I mean, like, oh my God, like what in the world? Like, what a pathway, you know, to end up. Yeah, to the continued criminalization. So I mean, it's a work in progress. I'm thinking about it, and I'm willing to imagine it, and I'm willing to listen to the refusals, and that's what we have to do, right? We have to listen to that.
Janeth, sorry to keep you waiting.
Yeah, thank you so much for all contributors, for the nice ideas, for supporting the children. I would like to comment in terms of the safety of the security, whereby Kim was presented, and also Ashi. For instance, here in Tanzania, we have the network, the children network, the child protection network. They call it Sumaujata. It means this network is the group, the community themselves who are volunteering in terms of sharing the news or the issues raised about the case of the children who have been abused. And those, what we call the Sumaujata, it's a local name, but it's those ones that are coming from the community themselves. And with that one, it means the government, they recognize them, and also they are working within the community so as to observe the cases about the child abuse or the child protection issues, from those at school or whether at the home or whether at the region institution or even in the kindergartens. So it means through this system, it is being helped in terms of providing the news or providing the information about the children who have been getting the abuse. And this network have been worked very good, because now we can see even somewhere if there is an issue of the child abuse, it means this system is working very strong. In addition to that, at the street level and the ward level, we have the child council team. It means the group of the children who have been trained about sharing or adhering the issue of the child if they get the child abuse cases, whether at the school or anywhere. It means those children, they have been given the mandate of sharing or reporting at the village leaders. On top of that, we have also the parent committee. It means the parent committees that have been established from the street level to at the national level. It means that one is also have given the power in terms of getting the parenting education and also the issue of the child protection and how to secure the children. For that case, at the general, it has been helped in terms of the community or the nation, also the government, to see how the issue of the child protection or the child security is intent or it is in the level at the national level.
So, Janeth, do you see tensions between the very small street level community groups, the parent groups, the child council groups, who eventually move up and interact with those at government level? Are there tensions? Are there differences in terms of how issues get handled? Do you see that working in conflict, or is it a smooth synthesis of sorts?
Yeah, thank you so much for the good question. I can see that when we working with them during the field supervision or during the training, the community campaigns, sometimes they are raising the issue of the bureaucracy. For instance, when there is an issue of the child abuse, they're going to report at the street level or at the ward level, community level. And then the case should be moved from community, maybe to the social welfare department, and sometimes to the court. So in those systems, there are issues of the bureaucracy, and sometimes the child can get more, be affected depending to the kind of the child, depending to the type of the abuse. For instance, if it is a physical abuse or if it is a sexual abuse, it means the more you're delaying, the more the child is getting to be affected at the healthy or psychological. So it means for those groups which I mentioned, the issue of the bureaucracy is among of the like a challenge to them in terms of getting the solution. On top of that, there is also the issue of the education or awareness to them. Awareness how? Because those are the indigenous people who they have their traditions, they have their belief. So sometimes within the community, if the issue of the child protection or child abuse appeared within the community, since they didn't understand maybe the act or the law or the regulations, they are talking themselves as the relatives so as to ensure the case is not moving up well at the social welfare department or at the court, so as to simplify the case. So when we are making in deep in terms of monitoring, sometimes we are getting the challenge or the cases that some children have been getting abused. After getting the abuse, the cases have been resolved by the member of the committee within the community. That means they are fighting. When they are going to the court, it means the court will be responsible and they will act based on the law. Yeah.
Any comments from Ashley or Kim on the Tanzanian experience?
Yeah, I'm just, that's just so interesting, Janeth. I think what sort of has been highlighted for me, and I think also through you, Ashley, is the, the importance of community there, and even from an Indigenous perspective here, we have particular Indigenous early childhood services, and they have come about historically around protecting community through having Indigenous educators as well as children and families there. And it continues that kind of notion of protection in community and safety, that the notions of cultural safety. And as you sort of mentioned, Janeth, about sometimes communities can actually, they resolve particular, issues, and sometimes enormous, problematic issues where there's, a potential for harm of children. So we see that here. But I also, if I think about myself as an adult experiencing disability and teaching, where my strengths really came to the foreground was exactly in community as well. And I mean both Indigenous community, but also a wider early childhood community. I worked with many educators at once. And so if I couldn't do something, if I couldn't see a child properly on a climbing frame, for example, where of course something really can go wrong there, I could draw on my other colleagues and, really trustful, reciprocal type of relationship and say, look, I can't really do something here. And I was really very fortunate that that was afforded to me, that I was in a really strength-based early childhood community where I could draw on other people and say, look, I can't quite do this properly, but I can go and do, something else. And they just saw me in a really strength-based way and said, yeah, that's no problem. You just, led an entire bush kinder program for the last hour and a half and we were out walking. So, you're doing, they could see that I was already doing things. They could see me as a competent educator. And I'm just really mindful of how, collectively we can work together. And I think that's a really key part of activism anyway, that, we draw on other people. We're interdependent, we're not these isolated people that sometimes power structures can really highlight and put onto people, that, you're individually responsible and you're this individual person and you're a silo, and it's not accurate. We all are interdependent. you know, so we should be. So and I, you know, and that's not a failing. It's a, you know, it's a strength.
So I'm still curious to push all of you further on how you position yourselves as activists and confront the tensions and challenges of the bureaucracy versus the collective interdependence. How you deal with the resistance, because you all must have encountered resistance at different points along your trajectories of activism. So, of course, the bureaucracy represented by governmental sectors as well as NGO sectors. NGOs also have heavy bureaucracies. I mean, how do you position yourselves in relation to that, and how do you move things forward? How do you create transformative action, recognizing the resistance and confronting it? Janeth, let's start with you, because you described very well the different circles of interdependence in villages in Tanzania, and sometimes one of those collective groups may not forward a child abuse case to social welfare, for example. So there's some resistance I see there. But in terms of your experience, because you've also worked globally in terms of early childhood learning in many countries, I mean, how do you handle resistance and opposition to these particular goals?
Thank you so much for the question. You know, in terms of when you are working in the community program, the challenge or the tension, also the resistance, are the things which we say that we, as a practitioner, we are expecting will happen. So, as I can say that first of all, I am a person of, I always not being discouraged with the community program. And also, I'm the person with the tolerance and also the creativity. For instance, sometimes
and patience, sounds like. And patience, lots of patience.
Yes, with the passion.
Yeah.
So sometimes you can have the, for instance, I can give the example, the cases, the example from the current program which we are working. We were establishing the community-based ECD centers by using the community resource. So among of the challenge was at the location where we were working, because we have the international organizations which are providing the funds or the donation in some of the projects, and also we have also the local organization. So for us, when we visited there and elaborating to the community about establishing the centers by using the community resource, most of them, they have the negative perception. And sometimes they're framing that, oh, you have been received the donor or the funds from the international organization, and now you are coming so as you can use our resource. So they have the negative perception. And also there where they have the dependence, they have the idea of being dependent in terms of depending to the donor fund. But the reality is we didn't get any fund from an organization. While we are using the knowledge, the skills, our passion in terms of supporting or promoting early childhood education at Tanzania in that specific area, so as we can open up their mind that the resources of establishing that one community base is within in your community. So you have the asset, you have the resource, but how you can utilize them is for themselves is a challenge because they are different in terms of education, in terms of perception, and also the cultural understanding. So for that one, we were always making the collaboration meetings with the government department, specifically the social welfare department, in terms of they advise us in terms of forming the committee. And the committee, the chairperson should come from the community themselves, and who will be like an ambassador to speak within the community to provide the awareness. So as since the ambassador is coming from their community, it means they will believe that these things is very important. Even though that we are practitioner, we are technical, we know, but when it's come to the community, your education will not have an advantage because for themselves, they're not looking for education, because you know that the community, they're coming from the different level of education, level of awareness. For themselves, they have something which is calling the belief. They have the belief for themselves. So for that reason, we create in terms of having the alternative ways to ensure that the community centers is established in that area. At the end of the time, we succeed. Why? Because first of all, we see that one was a problem. And then we sit down as a team to resolve and not running away to the problem. And also to have the committee and seeing the another creativity way so as to resolve the problem. Finally, I can say that in order to be the activism, it means you're supposed to have the heart of love, and also to have the passion and the commitment in changing the community mindset in a positive way. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Ashley, what are your thoughts?
I would say that I always think about, you know, in my work, and I think Janeth has spoken to this, about how we sort of have to agitate from the inside. I think about those of us that may be working in NGOs, nonprofits, in the government, how we are, you know, making tiny fissures in the system in the way that folks are thinking about things on the program level and even on the executive level. I think we have that responsibility, or we have that privilege to be within the organizations, and as the term says, being in it but not of it. Those are the ways I've also seen modeled by say some of the abolitionist social works out here in Los Angeles, right? And trying to step away from mandated reporting, which of course stretches into early childhood education. So I want to say agitation is important from wherever we are. Also, I think about the pipelines. I think about early childhood education often starts like at the community college level. Like, what are we teaching them? Not the educators that go to the 4-year university, but those that are going into a 2-year or maybe taking a few units to get their state licensure. What are we teaching them about, you know, these traditional ways of educating children, about supporting communities? Could it be more than that, you know, foundational course on homeschooling community partnerships, right? Like everyone takes that course and they're like ready to roll, but no, like, what's the reading that we're doing? I was in a conversation with someone else the other day about how, you know, we have to really change the way that folks in the early care and education pipeline are reading about children and families in the communities they intend to work. We can't wait for them to go to a 4-year university or a master's in teaching or what have you to think critically about educating children and about the community, because early childhood education is like the first step before you get into the school system, right? And it's an important foundation, you know, for children to be, you know, to be treated fairly in an equitable way, for their families to be seen as whole. And for us not to problematize behaviors and kick a child out of our center or our family childcare home for acting out, or when a parent is constantly late. Like, what is the safety plan or the community plan that we have for one another when we see these things that may trigger a response, such as being as reporting it? What are we going to do instead of reporting, right? We have to have these plans in place, and we have to train the teachers up in thinking more critically about who they will be when they develop their teaching philosophy and their statement. When they go out in the world, they've got to be thinking critically and not just by the book, not by the manual, like that. And that is the other agitation, right? And then I also want to think about, if you're not—
I have to ask you to take 30 seconds so I can get to Kim, because I'm getting notes about time.
Thinking about coalition networks. So if I am mutual aid, Janeth, you're somebody else, Kim, you're somebody else, how are we working together and understanding each other's part in the community? That's important,
Good, yeah. Multi-tolerance instead of zero tolerance, right? Kim, your comments, and then I'm going to ask each of you to wrap up very, very quickly, because this hour has flown by, and hopefully we'll have a few minutes to go over our hour for you to wrap up. But let me get to Kim. Kim, your comments on this.
Yeah, I think as well, collective. So and exactly, the critical approaches that you mentioned as well, Ashley. For me, it's ecological as well. It's it's everybody around you, it's the systems around you, and what is there as well. So Indigenous people in Australia, we don't have a warrior history, we have a peaceful history, in the sense that the way we confront and resist is through peaceful ways of being. And that may sound a bit absurd, but we will confront through acts of resistance, like through the arts, or through developing our own legal networks, or developing our own medical services, which are culturally safe spaces, and that people will want to go to, because all of those spaces, including education, have been places where children have been forcibly removed. So they're not naturally culturally safe places for many Indigenous people. And for me personally as well, in terms of those ecological systems around me, my own father was not privileged to have education through intergenerational poverty and lots of relations in that sort of space. And what that meant was that he wanted to see education as really important for myself and for my brother. And so that was really encouraged. So I think what we encourage as well, and what's encountered in our own lives and the systems around us, makes a really big difference there. And the strengths that I held in literacy, I think, as part of that, is education systems, as in terms of writing and speaking and using voice, have enabled me as a community member, an Indigenous community member as well, to be able to speak back through some of those peaceful ways, which is really important as part of Indigenous culture. So many activities are kind of represented in that way, as ways of showing day-to-day activism in lots of ways. And you can't do any of those things as part of being a community member without elders around you to support those processes and to help continue that cultural safety too. So these are all things that that I sort of try and speak to when I'm mindful of when I'm practicing as a teacher, when I'm working in higher education with students and helping their understandings to grow, and so that they can become those critical thinkers that you mentioned as well, Ashley, going into their day-to-day practices in education or whatever career they're going to be working into.
Thank you so much, all of you. You've actually answered my next question, which was recommendations moving forward, and each of you have made recommendations drawing deep into the roots of your own community activism. Is there anything that you would like to recommend that RISI, the sponsoring organization for this panel, could do to assist each of you? And you have half a minute to make your recommendation to RISI each before I wrap up. Anything that you'd like RISI to think about in terms of the future, support, etc. Janeth, did you?
Yes, thank you so much. I would like to recommend in terms of doing more researches on how the community practices or cultural approach can be used as the way or the pathway in terms of supporting or promoting early childhood education. More than on top of that, I would like also to recommend in terms of how to ensure that we have the global network, which will be responsible in terms of seeing the value and also the practices of early childhood education at the community level by considering the contextualization from the different countries.
Good, thank you. Half a minute to Ashley. Any recommendations for research?
Recommendations. Get this quality research that Janeth recommends into the hands of the people that are practicing on the grounds, right? And not just in the air, in the towers, like, you know, paywall blocked, but really making sure that this information is getting to the people who could potentially do the most harm in order to do the most good.
Well put. Kim, half a minute, recommendations.
I'd love to see this sort of network, the global activisms, a little bit more in publication, and some research as well. I think that could kind of speak to these issues at all sorts of levels, and I think as well as a practitioner level, but also an academic level too. I think that's really important so that people in all of the structural levels, including power structures, are thinking a little bit more at a critical level too about what practitioners may be experiencing as well.
Excellent recommendations. Thank you so much. So I would like to conclude the panel discussion now by just throwing out some words that have really resonated throughout this discussion. Community, indigeneity, agitation, resistance, using your voice, strength-based, culturally safe spaces, and creating tiny fissures in the system so that we can get our fingers in there and start reshaping. So we need to end this section and move on to the next piece, which will be the question and answer session. I would like to thank you all so much for sharing your experiences, your insights, and your really deep thinking about how to exist as an activist within the larger milieu that does not always invite or welcome activism and advocacy. So thank you all so much. I really enjoyed moderating the panel and getting to know you. And I thought the RISI recommendations really take us further. Thank you.